G'day guys, this is just part 2 of the flocking side is the airbrushing. So I'm going to go over mallard drake today. I've flocked the body. I haven't done the head yet. I generally do them last just because I find if I flock them I've got less to hold on to, and then also it's less spray contamination. I don't have to worry about taping it up and being careful with that flocking. It's just a lot easier and it's what I prefer. Like I'll say with everything I do, this is just the way that I do it. So if you want to take that on board, that's sweet. Not everybody's going to do it the same, and not every way's the wrong way. Just people have different ways of doing it, different things they like. So this is just my way. If you like it, sweet. If you don't, you don't. If you take something away from it, even better. So I normally start with, I just get a bit of air from the airbrush. I just try and get some of that loose flocking off it. You don't really want it matting on there. If there's too much on and you start to paint it or move it, you can end up with some clumps. So just try and get any loose stuff off there first. The air works pretty good at getting most of it off. And then after that you can just go over with a dry brush just to make sure you did get all that stuff off. There's nothing stuck in there. I've left this flock, it's been about a week, probably actually a little bit more, just to make sure it is on there. If you handle them too soon, you'll see it start to mat down from your hand marks and stuff, and it just doesn't look as tidy. So it's better just to play it safe and let them fully dry before you muck around with them. For the airbrushing, I used to buy some quite fancy airbrushes. They all have a limited lifespan, they run out eventually. I've started using these ones and it cost me 23 bucks to my door. It's from AliExpress. The main thing I like is these little paint containers on top. Comes with a couple different sizes. They screw on and screw off. They're great, especially for now. A lot of the paints I use is spray paint. Spray it straight in there. The bigger one's a lot easier to do it with. And spray paint's great for that. It's pre-mixed, it's ready to roll, it's stored there, it's not going to go hard on you or anything. You don't have to worry about it. Use as much as you want, put it away for later. So yeah, great little airbrushes. I've had that one probably close to 2 years. It's done over 100 decoys and it's still going strong. I just soak it in a paint thinner when I'm not using it, give it a dry out when I'm ready to go, and haven't had many issues with them. So pretty happy so far. Paints, most of my paints are spray paints now just because it's a lot easier and quicker. I still have some mixed ones when I got some big colours mixed up, so I'm using them up before I go back to spray paints for those. So for the mallard drake, I'm going to start by spraying most of the body grey. I like to put a base coat or some sort of spray paint on every part of flocking. I find it makes it just that bit more hardy and durable. It also stops, you'll see if you've ever had any that don't have paint on them, is when they get wet, the flock starts to soak it up and they get these wet marks all over them where it's just absorbed. So the paint sort of gives it like that waterproof layer and stops that. So even if you're matching the same colour as the flock, I try and make sure there's some sort of paint on there. So I'll start by doing the body. I'm not going to worry too much about the chest and the tail, because they're going to get some pretty solid colours later. It's mainly just the main parts of the body, the wings and on the cape a bit there. So for this, because it's quite a bulk spray, I just keep it in the spray can. I don't even worry about the airbrush. This is just a gull grey that I really like the look of. It comes up quite nicely. It's just a Dulux metal shield, just from your local Bunnings or Mitre 10 sort of stores. So I find it works as a great base coat for these mallard drakes. So just going to try and get a nice even sort of quite light coat over the whole thing. You can see it start to change colour. Just make sure you get those different directions as well. Simple as that. It's base coat done. It's all the body there. Gives it a nice grey colour. Also starts to create that little bit of shadow effect already, just from the flock colour to the paint colour. So we'll let that dry. I try and let it dry between coats. That's why I generally try and do a batch at the same time. If you let it dry, it just stops you mixing that paint. You can mat it down with your fingers if you touch it now too. You'll get fingerprints all over it. So I try and let them dry before I do the next coat, just to avoid that. It's just a bit safer. Alright guys, so the grey base is all dry now, so we're going to move on to the next couple of layers. So I've got a little order that I do things in. It's just saves me swapping colours and sort of overlapping parts that are wet and stuff like that. So next bit I'm going to do is just a little bit of colour on this cape. It's just a base colour at the start. I like to follow what's on the actual decoy, what's carved into it. So you can see sort of this one's got quite a big shape on this one, so I'm just going to follow that. So for this colour, it's actually, I've got it mixed up now, and it's one of the few that's not a spray paint. So I just got to shop to colour match it by eye, and it's one of the few that I mix. But it's essentially just a copy of the little Humbrolls. It's a matte 110. I don't know if there's enough light in there to see that, but yeah, the matte 110 for that is just same copy. Mix it with some sort of thinner, just a 1-to-1 ratio. You sort of want it to look sort of like a milky consistency. Might take a bit of playing around with to get it right. I just free pour it. I don't measure it out when I do it, but yeah, it just looks like milk and it comes out quite nicely. Otherwise, if you put too much thinner, it can be too thin, it can run, or it's just not thick enough when you're putting it on there, and you'll need to do another coat. And if it's too thick, it'll start to clog up your airbrush. So it does take a little bit to play around with it, but 1-to-1, it's pretty sweet. I'll sort of show you how I do this. It's sort of, I haven't seen anyone else do it this way. It's just how I've found I kind of like the end result. It's nice and easy. This first base coat, I just do little circle motions just to cover the whole thing. You do see grey coming through. I kind of like that. It just gives a bit more shade and shadow to it. So I'll show you how I do that. Hopefully you can see a bit of detail, and then we'll move on to the next layer. So I normally start around the outside of it. Just splash that on my hand a bit there. So I start around the outside somewhere. I'll just make sure I've got that going good. And I'm just doing these random circles. Nothing's perfect because none of the feather pattern on a duck is perfect, and you'll hear me say this quite a lot, but when you're doing a lot of the close detail stuff like that for decoys, I mean, it's not for the ducks, it's for you guys to look at when you're sitting there and you're a bit bored and you want to look at some nice decoys. The ducks are only really going to see the basic patterns that you put on there and the colours. So it's just a whole lot of overlapping circles. You can see I don't really go too close with the airbrush, so they're not really thin circles. They've got a bit of a bold outline to them, and there's no real pattern, it's just a complete random, and we just follow that shape, and you can see it quite well on these particular decoys. These full bodies are just older style GHD oversized full bodies. You just go around, and if there's anything you want blurred, just blur it a bit now. Also, one thing for guys that haven't done a lot of airbrushing before, and that's less is more at the start, because you can always come back and put more on. It's a lot harder to take it off afterwards. So those circles for that one are pretty much done. You can see it's looks a bit weird at this stage with no other colour on the decoy, but you'll see sort of the method to my madness when it comes. You may like it, you may not, but it's just the way I do that part. So next I'm going to add the brown for the feather detail on the wings along there. A little bit of shading on the body if that's what you want. I sort of mix it up between having some quite pure ducks and then also some quite dark ones, because we get a lot of dark mixes, so I find dark is better. And when you're looking at a mob of ducks from far away, a lot of them look brown anyway, so we don't actually see too many of these, and from far away they don't always stand out like that anyway, so quite like to put quite a bit of brown on them. But a few of these ones, because if it's someone else, I'll keep as nice full drakes. Now I've finished the cape, I've done that lighter colour, and next one I do is I do the chest, the sort of reddish brown colour on there. The reason I do that is because later on I'll add a darker brown, like a chocolate brown, to this cape. Sometimes I also add it to the chest, and it's also the wings colour, so it stops me changing up colours a whole lot. So I come back to other areas rather than finish that all in one and then move on to the next. The chest colour, I've been through a few different colours. Used to use the red oxide, mix that with other colours, such and such. Now I've got this real, it's one of the other only few ones that I mix up, and it's not in a spray can. It's quite a reddy brown, like the chestnutty colour. It's quite dark, which I like. I can't remember the Humbrol colour off the top of my head, but it's an exact copy of this little hobby paint as well. So I'll put a picture up in the video. I think the Humbrol was maybe 98. Can't quite remember. I'll see if I can look it up for you as well. But it's a great base colour for the chest, and then you can add like a red oxide if you want it a bit brighter to pop, or you can add your sort of chocolate brown to darken it up or make it a bit more patchy, however you see. So for this, the only real thing to consider is, same again, I follow the shape of the decoy, but when you're going around the edge of this, I try and spray from the body back, because if you spray the other way you're going to get a lot of overflow coming onto your body, and you want to avoid that. So you can do the main bit sort of from most angles, but really when you get around the edges, try and make sure you hit those hard angles to stop that overflow. Hopefully I can sort of, you can see in this video, and I'll show you how I do it. I like to start around the edge too, just so you sort of know where you're going to be filling in after that. And I like to keep it kind of blurred. You'll see with a lot of my stuff, I keep it quite blurred, because that's just sort of the look I like, and the finer, real sharp lines and sharp details, they're only really going to look good to you. And I think the blurred actually looks slightly better on a lot of the places anyway, because that's what it's like on an actual duck. Some decoys you'll probably just have to guess where you want to go, or make it up yourself, because they don't have a really good carving pattern in them. But a lot of the ones I do seem to be sort of GHG or AVNX, and they've got a really good base carving shape to follow, which makes it a lot easier if you're not so good at freehanding or making up your own pattern. Makes a huge difference on the hens. So I do a bit of a sweeping action when I'm doing this. Generally do it one way, and then when I come back I'll do it the other way, just to really try and fill in that colour, but also it sort of gives it a little bit more of a patchy look as well, where some areas get hit a bit harder than others and some are still quite light. But as you can see, it's sort of coming up already, and it's starting to get quite a good darker chestnut colour, which I like the look of. And I'll keep saying this, but this is just for guys that want to copy what I've done. I mean, there'll be a ton of other colours out there, a ton of other ways to do this. This is just exactly how I do them. So if that's the look you're after, then feel free to copy it. Let me know if you do like what I've done or what I could change. I'm always keen to hear opinions on other things. I'm not going to bag anyone else's because everyone's different. I mean, mine definitely aren't the best. There's some amazing guys out there. This is just a version that I'm happy with, without spending crazy amounts of time that I'd need to do to get the same sort of looks that they're getting. So you can see now I'm going back, going over it again, but crisscrossing from the other angle, just to really get in everywhere. You just start to blend in with this cape a bit too. Doesn't matter if you mix in too much, because that's what it does anyway. It just fades into each other, and you can go over it with some darker colours later to really blend them in, or however you like. So then just have a look around as you're going. Make sure everywhere looks like it's got a good coat. Once it's dry, you can come back later and do a bit more, but it's good if you can get it all in one go. Saves you coming back later just for a little bit of colour and putting it through your airbrush again. It's just a bit easier and quicker. So pretty happy with that. It's got some nice blurred lines. I've gone heavy in some places and it's looking a bit patchy already, so I might add a bit of brown later just to patch it up a bit more, but pretty happy with that at the moment. Alright, so that chest is dry, so the next colour I'm going to add, it's going to be the bit of brown on the wing feathers. So I'm going to add some brown along here, you'll see, and then start to bring some shading into that cape just to give it that next layer on there. So for this part of it, I've gone through a few browns, and it's just dependent on what I've got at the time, but at the moment I'm using this gloss chestnut brown. The main thing when you pick your browns, I mean there's heaps you can use, but you just really don't want a red brown, which a lot of them seem to be. They've got that sort of red tinge in them, because then you'll find it starts to sort of look like the chest a bit. You really want just a nice plain brown. Some of them are sort of earth browns. You want to try and avoid those. They've really got a red tinge to them, especially when you try and mix them to lighten or darken them. So I'm just using that one at the moment, and then spraying it into my airbrush, and then I'm just adding some black to darken it as I like. So it's really up to how you like it, but that's the colours I do. And I've just added that black just to make it a little bit sort of almost like a charcoal brown now. So I'm going to start with these wing feathers for what I do. Some people do run a bit of tape on there to get a real fine line, but I don't really do that for too many things on my decoys, so I'm not going to do it on this one. I just normally freehand most of it. The only thing I really tape up is if I start to put some colour into the wings, which I might do just for the video to show you how I do mine. So for these, you can do as much or as little as you want. I try and mix them up so that all the decoys are slightly different. Sometimes I'll just put the bare minimum on there, so it really looks like those sort of pure drakes. And then other times I'm really going to put a lot on there and shade it in, so they start looking more like our crossbreeds that we seem to get a little bit. And I just kind of prefer the darker base body decoys, so a lot of mine I do tend to put a lot more brown on than you'll see some people do. So I'm just going along the edge of the wings and then shading in the middle as much as you want. I quite often put a little bit of that feather shading in there that's on the decoy. Not much, just a tiny bit, so that on different angles it sort of catches your eye. When I'm doing this, you're trying to follow the carving, so go over the edge so you're not getting a whole lot of overspray everywhere else that you don't want it. So you just got to work the shape of the decoy with how you want to spray it to get slightly, to do it freehand you get cleaner lines that way. And just lots of little lines. Start lighter, you can always add more. You can't, if you do one really solid thick line, you can't, it's quite hard to take that away. So start with lots of little passes and then just add it as you get the look you want. This bit here, you can be a little bit rough on the inside because you are going to darken that up with a little bit of black. Where you can see on these ones the wing feathers are parted, so there will be a bit of black there on the back. It's looking not bad there. And then I just follow this body shape too, put a little bit of shading in there and a couple just random marks on the body. I find it gives it a nice bit of sort of shadow effect, makes them look quite nice when they are out in the field. Just really light so you can barely tell it's there, but it does catch your eye. Just makes it look less of one big grey light bulb. And then for the cape, we did the circles to put on the lighter colour. So now what I'm going to do is just a whole lot of little half C's. Not too sharp, I want them to be blurry still. But we're just going to do them sort of like little M's on there, just to blend that in a bit, and then it sort of gives it that feather effect. I normally start from the outside so I can blur that outside and then just blend it in as I go. And then as you come around, just start to overlap them a bit. I prefer it to be quite a random pattern rather than perfect. Some guys like everything being perfect, but not many ducks you see are perfect, so I like to just make it random. And it's a lot easier if you've got OCD that way to accept what you've done. Some guys just do their cape fully one colour. There's nothing wrong with that. This is just a way I've found that I like doing mine. I used to do them all one colour when I also flocked it one colour, and I flocked it a separate colour, but because you'll see some guys as well, they flock individual colours, so they'll flock their butts black and they'll flock the chest that sort of red colour, and then they'll add a bit of airbrushing after. I used to do a lot of that, I don't anymore, mainly because this is a lot quicker and I also find it a lot cleaner. You don't end up with the flocking joins in places, which used to really annoy me. The only thing I do now is the mallard drake heads, I'll do them separate because I think they look better like that. And later on, if I do a parry hen, those as well. Just when there's a head that's a definite solid colour of the different colour, I'll flock it. But I prefer the whole body to be flocked one colour and then airbrush, and I haven't found any difference in how long they last. It just, to me, is a lot cleaner, quicker, and yeah, it lasts exactly the same. So there's that cape done as well. So we've added the feather wing detail there, which we'll add another colour to later, a bit of black. And there's that cape starting to take shape, and it's got a bit of shading and colour now. Just starting to look quite nice. Looks a bit different than what it did before. So it's kind of a little bit hard to tell under these lights, but you'll get an idea, and I'll take some pictures out in the proper sunlight for you. So the next colour we're going to do, we're going to add some black to that. So once this is dry and I've done the other ones, we'll start that one. So now that's all dry, we're going to start with the black. First coat, do 2 coats of black, so I do a bit of some other colours in between. So I'm going to start, we're going to do the stuff around the tail and the bum. We just follow the contours of the decoy for that one, and a little bit of shading to the brown and a little bit on the back here between the wing feathers. So start with that. It's pretty straightforward, just exactly what you see. You just want to make sure you do give it a good coat, because you haven't flocked it black, it is grey, so that's half the reason I do 2 coats as well. And also, similar to when you're doing the other colours, spray away from the areas you don't want to do, so you don't want to get this body all covered in black. Just make sure you're angling towards the tail. Find it helps too if you sort of outline where you're going and then fill it in. Excuse me. And then you can just block fill it a lot quicker once you've done that. Go from all directions as well, just so you really get a good coat on there. You'll see little areas that probably won't get done, so you can come back to them. Try and give everything one good coat, and then you can come back and give it a touch up once it's a bit dry. They'll show up a bit more then too. When you do anything near the brown on the wing feathers or anything, if you're doing any shading, make sure you go less is more. You can always add it later, but as I said before, it's quite hard to take it back. So do it in lots of little layers rather than one thick heavy layer. I just sort of fade it out towards the top there in the middle. You can do what you want. Again, it's just copying the decoy. So here, along this brown, I generally do just an ever so slight sort of shading, so it's just a little bit darker on that edge with the black. It's not much, it's just a wee subtle bit. But you can overdo it quite easily, so take it easy. And then I try and get some of this feather detail just from the underside with the black. Just makes it sort of show up a bit better. Just sort of gives it slightly more shading on those feathers, makes it stand out a bit more. That's pretty much it for the first coat of black. It's pretty straightforward, doesn't take too long. Then once that's dry, we'll come back, we'll add some of the white for the tail feathers, and we'll put a bit of white in on the butt here, and then we'll come back and just catch any of that overspray with the black again, and at the same time we'll do the head. Oh, and I've added those little touches of brown for the shading on the body, so I do a real quick dusting just on top of those with the black. Just adds another shadow effect, and just like the way it comes up. Anywhere I've added a bit of shading, just add a bit of black to that too. And it's starting to take shape, it's starting to look like a decoy now, so should be finished shortly. So we've done all the black on the butt and the tail now. Gonna add a bit of white. The black's not fully dry, so I can't really touch it, so I've got to be careful, but we can do the white before we do the next coat of black. We've got to let the white dry, because it does tend to sort of blur a bit if you don't. Can get messy. You can get away with it, but I prefer to let that black dry, all of it dry before I do the next coat of black. So the white, we're just going to add some tail feather bits there, then we're going to add some around the butt here. This, I mean, a lot of the detail you do add, the finer stuff on decoys is just for your benefit, more the ducks, but it does just make them look that much more realistic, so we'll give it a go. So first of all, I do the feathers. On these decoys you can see the carving, so I just do a couple of passes on those. Again, sorry. I'll do a couple of passes on those just to bring them up, and then we can sort of kill the overspray with the black when we come back later. So we'll do those. Hopefully you can see a bit. So I don't get too carried away, and then I can come back in with the black just in between later and just make it look a bit tidier. And then the little bit of white we do here, we can fade this a little bit into the body, and it doesn't matter if we overspray the black, so I just go right on the join mark up here. Sometimes you can get a bit thicker, fade it out more. Some ducks are like that, some decoys as well, you just see you have a straight line there. I sort of just mix it up how I feel. Again, it's one of those things that's more for your benefit than the ducks. They're not going to see that or really care, but it does look quite a nice wee touch. The one thing you do want to watch for overspray is going too far onto the wings. So you do want to come down onto that a little bit. Just so you don't want to spray up and then have to re-darken all your wings. Just come down. And you will get a little bit of overspray in there sometimes, but because we darkened that when we did that black layer, when we do the next layer we can just give it a bit of a spray just to kill any overspray that went up there. But that's all I do for that. And then once that's all fully dry, we'll come back and tidy that up. We'll also add the black to the head, and that decoy is just about done. For the sake of the video, I will add some other colour in here later and a bit of shading, but for most part they'll be just about done next coat. Alright, so that's all dry. We're going to do the next step. So normally at this stage, if the head wasn't detachable, this one is, so I've put it back on. Head's all flocked. So normally when I get to here, I'd now put a bag over the body, masking tape up around the head, flock the head, let that dry, and then I can do the next step. And I'd normally leave that bag on there and all the body covered while I painted majority of the head, and then do a little bit of a touch up later, just because it stops a bit of the overspray. But since this one's detachable, I'm going to leave it, put it on now, and then start the process. So I'm going to darken this. Some guys get really fancy with the heads, they add yellows, they do all sorts of stuff, sometimes even the blues really bring out colours. I've found for what I do and for what I see in most of our drakes, just a nice coating of black with shading in certain places looks pretty good and does the trick for what I need. So you can get as fancy as you want with them. I don't, so you won't see it in this video. We're going to touch up the back end a little bit, darken in some of that overspray, tidy it up, and then for 95% of my decoys, the drakes, that would be them done. For the purpose of this video, I'll add a few other highlights, but yeah, generally after this next step, that'll be it done and ready to roll. So I'll start with the back end here. So we're just going to go around really and just sort of blacken up where that overspray is. We're going to go in between the little feather lines we've done in here, and just where we've done the white around here, we're just going to tidy that up a bit. So we're really just going over the black again, just trying to define where we really want it. And if we had any overspray onto our darker colours, just darken that in so we've got more vivid lines like we used to have. So I normally start with the bulk parts, do those first, and then get into the finer detail. Just remember, for the purpose of this, you're just trying to cover up the black, so try and aim your overspray towards the black. You don't want to come from this side and start mixing into that white or the body of your grey. If you haven't done that much airbrushing before, just try and remember and just try and think about where that overspray is going to go, because you'll save yourself a bit of headaches for later if you're just thinking about that. So then on this little top bit, all I'm going to do is, when I did the white, I've gone sort of on these top corners, so I'm going to come from the other side and just go in these darker bits just to clean those up a little bit. So that's all I do for the tail there. It's just giving it sort of the highlights on the tips. Some guys put a full white tail on there. You can do whatever you want, whatever you prefer. Down here we don't get, I don't see a lot of the pure white tails, it's just a little bit of colour, so that's how I like to do them. So that back end's pretty much done now. Then we're just going to add a bit of shading on the head, and then that's the bulk of that decoy done. So for the head, I normally start with the top, go a bit darker, a little bit of shading underneath and around the eyes, and then I just do a really light coat over the whole thing, and it just takes away that sort of really light flocking green and makes it a bit darker. Because I mean, when you're looking at the mallards from a fair distance away, the heads actually look black. Some guys actually just flock theirs black or paint it black. So a lot of my decoys, you might notice, I actually prefer things a little bit darker than a lot of people, and that's just based off what I see, so, and what I like. And you can mask the body up. I like to blend it in a little bit, but just be aware you are going to get a bit of overspray here, so just be careful of how much and where you're angling it. Just like everything too, less is always more. You can come back and add a bit more later on, or as you go, but if you go too heavy on any of the lines at the start, then you're going to end up with quite dark there permanently. So now I'm just going around, giving the whole thing a little dusting in black. Still leaving the highlights, but like I said, for what I do, I like them just to be a dark green rather than adding any other colours and getting too carried away. And then just a bit of shading wherever you want it. And so for the most part, I'll take the tape off once that's dry and we'll show you what it looks like. But that's most of them done as they are, and once it's dry I'll add a bit of white to the neck, give it its wee collar, and I'll probably put some colour on this wings. I only do that on a couple because, like I said, for what I see, I think they look a little bit weird if I do that to every single one. We don't get a whole lot of pure drakes everywhere, so I prefer to just keep them like that, sort of neutral, and then add it to a couple of the others. It's more for you to look at anyway than anything else, rather than ducks, but it does make them look quite cool. But yeah, it's pretty much done. Alright guys, so the last part to what I do on some of these decoys, not all of them, like I've said, it's just personal choice. Some guys put them on all of them, some don't. I just don't, because I don't see it on all the ducks that I look at, so I find it's more for our benefit than anything else, so I just put it on a couple. So I've taped it up already so that it doesn't take up too much time in this video, but there's a bit of white on the neck, a bit of colour on the feathers, so I'll just show you how I do that, and then you can add it to yours if you want or not. So for that I just use this paint here, It was just the first blue that I found, an ocean blue that I liked that was in an enamel. Seems to do the job. You can light it, darken it, do whatever you want when you do it. That's just up to you. So we just start by doing a bit of a coat. Might take 1 or 2 passes just to get over that dark grey. You can mask it off beforehand, before you do the dark brown, sorry, if you want to make it a bit easier, but I've found it's just the same and it's easier doing it this way rather than trying to avoid that spot the whole time. Just do an extra coat of blue later and it shows up fine. So then what I'll do is I'll show you, and I'll let that dry and then add a bit more masking tape just to add a bit of shading. Alright, so that blue's touch dry, so all I've done now is added this little bit of tape a bit further down, and it's just underneath the bit of feather detail that's carved into the decoy. We're just going to do a really ever so slight bit of shading underneath that. It's quite good with the tape there because you can actually see just how much you've done, because it's really easy to go too heavy on that. And then I'm just going to move it down to the next one. You can see it's starting to come in. There's just that little bit of shading, a little bit of added effect. And the same on this side. This one's a bit funny shape, but I'm just following the carving they've got on that decoy. So when we pull that off, it's just giving that little bit of detail on there. You go lighter or heavier. I'm just going to add a little bit of shading in here before I put the white in. Alright, so the final bit on that, I've just taped up all this. We're going to do little white stripes just at the end for the detail, and then we're going to go around the neck so it's finished. So just like that. Do the neck and we'll give that another coat after. You don't have to tape these either. It's just something I do because I find it comes out a lot neater, and I tend to overspray a lot if I don't with this white, so it just saves me trying to fix it later. One other thing I do when I've done these is I actually take this tape off whilst it's still wet, because if there's any overspray you actually tend to rub it off a bit while it's still wet. That hasn't come out too bad, there's just that little bit of colour there now. Same on that side. Tiny bit of overspray at the top there, which I'll tidy up, a little bit back there. Might just darken that up, but it's actually coming off alright. And same with the neck. This can be a bit harder to start because of the way I've taped it. Couple of wee bits of fluff on there, but there you have it. For the most part, that's how I do my mallard drakes. All done. Doesn't actually take too long, takes a lot longer doing a video for you guys, but yeah, hopefully that helped a few of you out.